My name is Jonathan Reeves, and for the first time I speak this name without hiding behind it, without disguises, without the emotional shield I carried like armor for almost my entire life. For many years, I was just a surname whispered in narrow corridors, damp alleys, and rooms where no one dared turn on the light. Reeves, that's what they called me. Short, direct, enough. A name that revealed nothing, and at the same time revealed everything about the kind of man I was becoming. I convinced myself that I liked this distance. I liked the anonymity, the coldness, the idea that nobody really knew me. Because deep down, I knew that if someone looked behind my empty expression, they would find a man at war with himself. I said I was just a product of the streets, a survivor marked by scars that the world didn't care to understand. Feeling is weakness, I repeated. And the more I repeated it, the more I believed it. Not because it was true, but because it justified the path I chose to follow, a path that deep down I knew exactly where it ended. But death, my real death, didn't begin the day my heart stopped. It began much earlier. It began the first time I ignored my conscience, the first time I silenced that small, nagging, almost imperceptible voice that tried to stop me from crossing a line from which I would never return. When you silence that voice once, the second time is easier. The third, even more so. Until one day you realize it has completely disappeared, and that in its place there is only emptiness. An emptiness that I filled with arrogance, violence, power, and money. Everything that promised me strength, but delivered ruin. I thought I was becoming invincible, when in reality I was becoming insensitive. Each wrong choice ripped away a piece of my humanity, and I didn't even realize it. And that's why I'm opening up this story now. Because the instant my heart finally stopped, the second my consciousness detached from my body, discovered something no man trained to kill expects to face, the absolute truth about himself. And faced with this truth, no weapon, training, or coldness can help. There is no shadow to hide in. No slogan of strength can sustain you. On the other side, everything you try to forget appears. Everything you try to bury resurfaces. Everything you thought you controlled confronts you. What I saw, what was shown to me, destroyed any illusion I had about myself, about my life, about the destiny I was building with my own hands. And the scariest part? What was revealed to me in that first moment wasn't even the beginning of what was yet to come. If you stay with me, I'll tell you exactly what happened after I took my last breath, and why this revelation could change everything in your life too. Now I know this account. If this has already sparked something in you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Stay with me to discover what happened next. Revelations that could transform your life and awaken your soul before it's too late. When I think about how it all really began, I realize that a life of crime never came to me as an explicit invitation or a clear promise, but as a shadow that slowly approached, filling the voids I pretended not to have. I grew up believing that needing someone was shameful, that depending on someone was weakness, and that the only safe path was one where I was in absolute control, even if that control was just an illusion created by fear. The first people who offered me work didn't use direct words. They just tested my limits, observed how far I would go to prove I wasn't a coward. And when I realized it, I was already involved in a world that seemed to give me what I had never felt: importance. Money was the first sweet lie that won me over. It arrived quickly, without questions, without papers, without anyone questioning my worth. Each completed mission seemed to add a layer of invincibility to my body, as if I were being molded for something greater, when in reality I was only allowing my heart to be slowly extinguished. Weapons were not just tools, they were symbols of an authority I believed I possessed, an authority built on the weakness of others and on the inability to look within myself. The feeling of being feared became a silent drug, and I began to confuse fear with respect, silence with loyalty, and violence with destiny. Over time, what initially seemed like a choice became routine, and that routine became such a profound part of my identity that I could no longer imagine who I would be without that world. I thought I was on top, that I was guiding my own story. But all I did was surrender my soul to a darkness I didn't yet recognize. And the first fall came when I least expected it. The first time I took a life didn't happen in a cinematic setting, nor was it the result of some grand mission that could justify what I did. It happened almost silently, coldly, as if the world had held its breath. At that moment, waiting to see who I would become after that shot, I remember every detail, the metallic smell of the air, the tension that made my muscles tremble, the sweat running down my hands as I held the gun, not because I was afraid of the other man, but because I was about to discover if there was any moral barrier within me capable of preventing me from going forward. And when the shot rang out, something inside me crumbled with frightening speed, as if I had voluntarily opened a door. That had always been there, just waiting for me to have the courage to touch it. In the moments that followed the shot, I felt no guilt, no remorse, nor the horror that anyone would expect to feel upon crossing such a definitive line. What I felt, in fact, was a strange, almost intoxicating impulse, as if I had tasted a power I shouldn't have known. That was the moment my conscience ceased to be my companion and became a distant, weak echo, unable to reach me. Instead of hesitating, I normalized. Instead of questioning, I silenced any thought that might lead me to regret. The first life taken was, without my realizing it, a silent pact with a darkness that doesn't retreat once you invite it in. And it was there, exactly there, in the instant when I felt nothing, that the true transformation began. A transformation so profound and so dark that later, when my heart stopped, I would clearly see the price I paid for opening that door. As time passed, I realized that the worst consequence of that first shot wasn't the death of the man who fell before me, but the slow and silent death of something inside me that I never quite knew how to name. The more I repeated the act, the less I felt. And the less I felt, the more natural it became to live as if my soul had been switched off. I walked the streets with the firm posture of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, but inside, there was such a great emptiness that it seemed to consume even the memories of who I once was. It's strange to admit this, but indifference has its own scent, a scent that deceives, that convinces you that you are getting stronger, when in reality, you are only distancing yourself from any trace of humanity that still existed within you. The people around me seemed like shadows crossing my path, without leaving any impact. Families crying, desperate looks, silent pleas for mercy. Nothing penetrated the barrier I had built to keep myself functional. And yet, I prided myself on this emotional block, as if it were a kind of indestructible armor, proof that I was different from the weak, the sensitive, those who still trembled before violence. The truth, however, is that I was becoming part of the same darkness I thought I knew how to control. I didn't realize how much I was being shaped by what I was supposed to master. The worst part is that this indifference not only transformed my work, it transformed my worldview, my relationship with time, my way of breathing. I became someone incapable of seeing value in anything that didn't bring me some direct benefit. And it was precisely when I believed that nothing else could reach me, that something decisive happened. The night everything fell apart didn't start any differently than the others. There was that familiar tension in the air, that feeling that I always needed to be one step ahead of any threat, carrying on my shoulders the weight of a life built on choices that never allowed rest. The mission seemed simple, almost mechanical, like so many others I had accomplished without hesitation. I remember walking down the street with the calculated coldness I believed I possessed, analyzing every shadow, every movement, every possible escape route, as if that could keep me safe. But the truth is, that day there was something different, something I couldn't explain. It was as if the silence carried a kind of warning that I refused to heed. When the shot came, it wasn't like in the movies, with time for reaction or heroism. It was a dry, direct sound that cut through the air and collided with my chest with a force that took my breath away before I even understood what was happening. The impact made me stumble backward, and the instant my hands touched the ground, I felt as if all the energy in my body was draining through my fingers. I tried to breathe, but each attempt was weaker than the last, as if the air had decided to abandon me. The world around me began to lose shape, and the darkness I carried inside seemed to finally manifest itself on the outside. Lying there, my consciousness fading, I realized there was no escape. No weapon, no money, no false name could save me. It was the end of the line, the point where all the lies I'd told myself could no longer sustain the life that was slipping away. And it was precisely when death completely enveloped me that something impossible happened. When darkness finally completely enveloped me, I imagined it would all end. There, that absolute silence would be my last conscious experience, but I was surprised by something I could never have anticipated. Instead of disappearing, I felt as if I were being pulled out of myself, not violently, but with such intense strangeness that my first instinct was to believe I was delirious. It was as if my body was sinking while my consciousness rose, as if I were leaving behind a shell too heavy to continue carrying. And in the blink of an eye, I found myself there, standing, looking at my own body stretched out on the ground, motionless, pale, completely oblivious to the presence of the one who was now observing it. The feeling of seeing oneself is not something easily described. There was no immediate panic, but a suffocating mixture of confusion and disbelief, as if my mind were struggling to find any logic in that moment that simply didn't exist. I tried to get closer, tried to touch my own face, but my arm pierced the air as if I were made of smoke. That's when the dread began to grow slowly, like a shadow stretching out to cover everything. It was the absolute certainty that I no longer belonged to that body, that the boundary separating life from death had been crossed, and there was no turning back. The environment around me seemed to distort, as if the world were breathing irregularly. The lights changed hue, the sounds disappeared, and a deep, almost dense silence began to fill every space. I then felt a force approaching, not a human presence, but something immensely greater, capable of filling the air with an authority that made me stop, as if time itself had been suspended. And it was at that exact moment, when everything was suspended between fear and the unknown, that he appeared. When that presence took shape before me, I immediately realized that I was not facing something that could be interpreted, explained, or compared to my human fears. It was not a nebulous apparition, nor a distant glow. It was a living, intense, yet gentle light, as if made of all that is pure and true. This light did not hurt the eyes, but it was impossible to look at it completely, as if each fragment of it revealed something I had always known, but never had the courage to confront. And at the center of this light, there was a figure whose authority did not need to be affirmed by any word, for his mere presence reorganized everything within me. My thoughts, my memories, my intentions, even the lies I had repeated for years began to unravel without him needing to say a single sentence. When I finally managed to lift my eyes, I was overcome by such a profound awareness of my own condition that it seemed every moral wound, every wrong choice, every life I had destroyed became palpable, heavy, impossible to ignore. I wasn't just standing before Jesus, I was standing before the absolute truth about myself. There were no masks, no justifications, no possible explanations. He didn't accuse me, and perhaps that was the most devastating blow, because I condemned myself when I saw my past reflected in the purity of his eyes. Every scene of my life began to unfold as if I were watching a cruel biography, uncut, undisguised, showing the exact extent of the marks I had left on others and on myself. And yet, in the midst of this silent judgment, there was something even more impactful, something I couldn't fully comprehend at that moment, but which would become inevitable in the seconds to come. Something he decided to show me. When Jesus slightly raised his hand, not as a gesture of condemnation, but as one who opens a door to what had always been hidden, I felt something around me tear open, as if a thin membrane separating consciousness from truth had finally been broken. In an instant, the light around him expanded and the space changed completely, revealing before me a scene that was not a symbolic invention, but the spiritual reality of the consequences I had produced with my choices. I saw faces, not quickly or blurry but with absolute clarity, as if each gaze were recorded in time itself, awaiting the moment when I needed to confront them. They were people I had hurt, families that were never the same again, paths that were interrupted before they could flourish, dreams crushed by the violence I helped perpetuate. They were not just victims, they were entire stories that I had erased without measuring the impact of what I was doing. As this revelation unfolded before me, I realized something even deeper. There was no hatred, no revenge directed against me, only the raw truth in the most unbearable form a spirit can face. I understood, in a single second that seemed like an eternity, that the evil we commit is not limited to the moment of the act. It spreads in waves, reaching places we never imagined. And Jesus, with a firmness that didn't hurt, but also didn't allow escape, made this clear without uttering a single verbal judgment. The vision itself judged me. The truth itself exposed me. And from the midst of this silence came an even more devastating understanding. That destiny unfolding before me was not something imposed by him, but rather the direct result of the paths I chose to follow. And it was precisely when I understood this, and anguish consumed my entire being, that something completely unexpected happened. When the revelation ended, I stood before Jesus in a silence that seemed to span centuries, feeling the weight of all that I had been, and at the same time, the strange realization that, even in the face of the most devastating truth about myself, something still remained accessible, as if a door I thought was definitively closed was only ajar, waiting for a gesture I never had the courage to make. It was at that moment that my spiritual strength seemed to give way, and I found myself completely broken, not by guilt itself, but by the profound awareness that I had lived an entire life without even trying to be different. I knelt, not because he commanded me, but because my soul could not bear to stand before such holiness, and the words that came out of me were not rehearsed. They were not rational. They were a silent cry for mercy. Jesus didn't answer with speeches, didn't lift me up, didn't touch me, but the atmosphere around me changed so noticeably that I knew, without logical explanation, that something was being granted. I felt a force pulling me back, as if I were being swallowed by a wind that placed me back on the edge between life and death, and before I could fully comprehend, my eyes opened in a white room, filled with desperate voices trying to bring my body back. The physical pain of that return was intense, but nothing compared to the spiritual impact of waking up, knowing that the life I had left no longer belonged to me, that every second from then on would be an undeserved opportunity. In the following months, I tried to rebuild what could still be restored. I sought out families, confronted, faces that hated me, asked for forgiveness even when I wasn't heard, and in each act of restitution I felt as if I were returning fragments of my own soul. I realized that true repentance is not an emotion. It is a daily, painful, persistent transformation that requires renouncing what once seemed to make sense. And it was in the midst of this restoration process that I understood why he allowed me to return and the message he wanted me to bring. When I finally understood that my return to life was neither a prize nor an automatic absolution, something within me changed irreversibly. It wasn't a comfortable reunion or a second wind to correct superficial mistakes. It was, in fact, an urgent calling, a summons that surpassed any mission I had accepted before, whether for money, prestige, or survival. The weight of this responsibility crushed me in a way that no earthly challenge had ever managed, because now I was dealing not only with physical lives, but with the eternity of souls, still unaware of the abyss that silently approached. Unlike the jobs I accepted in the past, driven by the desire for wealth or the fear of failure, this message did not depend on external circumstances. There was no contract, no payment, no material reward. What guided me was the vivid memory of what I saw when I stood before Jesus, the absolute reality of a presence that penetrates the soul and reveals, without mincing words, that nothing escapes his gaze. The truth pierced me like a blade, and there was no turning back. I understood in that instant that no one, absolutely no one, goes unnoticed in the eyes of God. Every thought, every choice, every small decision has weight. Every silence, every omission, every hidden sin is recorded, and eternity does not forget. When I speak to you now, I am not trying to provoke cheap emotion, nor manipulate feelings to create a momentary impact. Every word I utter carries the seriousness of what has been shown to me. This is not fiction or a superficial moral lesson. It is a real warning, a revelation that transcends the physical and enters the spiritual, showing the dimension of our choices and the gravity of our actions when confronted with eternity. Spiritual reality is not abstract, symbolic, or metaphorical. It is alive, concrete, inevitable. Yet many walk through this world believing they have time, that tomorrow will be more convenient, that consciousness can be silenced and postponed. But there is no later before God. The day life ends doesn't warn, doesn't negotiate, doesn't wait for you to be ready. The crossing is sudden, and what you took with you, whether light or darkness, will determine what you find. Every decision you make today builds the path you will follow later, and when the finish line is crossed, there is no going back. There are no adjustments, no corrections, no excuses. What you carried in your soul is what will be evaluated. That's why I need to speak to you with complete seriousness. If you are listening to my testimony now, don't treat these words as just another story, another video that will be forgotten in minutes. Consider them an urgent invitation, a spiritual warning, a chance to examine your own life before time runs out. Ask yourself, what truths am I avoiding? What choices have I been postponing? What silences have I cultivated to ignore the pain, the guilt, or the warnings that God has placed in my path? Every small omission, every act of deviation from the truth creates seeds that sooner or later will blossom before judgment. Allow God to find you now while there is still time. Don't wait for extreme situations, dramatic signs, or a near-death experience to awaken. Every moment you postpone is a lost opportunity for real transformation, for reconciliation with what is right, for purification of the heart. God's mercy exists as long as there is life, and repentance is the door that is still open. But it is not infinite. It requires conscious action, firm decision, and courage to confront one's own soul. If this video touched you in any way, don't let this opportunity pass you by. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like now. Here, every story is not just entertainment, it's a warning. Every testimony is a call to action, and each video may be exactly the message you needed to hear before it's too late. Keep watching, reflect, awaken your consciousness, and allow these truths to transform your life while there's still time.